Okay, so yesterday didn't go quite as good as I wanted, but we'll try again. Pretend like yesterday didn't happen, which means I will go in and clean up what I had done, because I know I had went one direction and did something different. So I'm just going to delete that. So I just still have my main controller and my login controller. And I'm going to go ahead and delete that one view controller that I started because I think I want to do it differently. So where I want to get to today is just that I have my login controller. I'm using Firebase to log in, but there's a little bit more information I want to get from the user. I'm going to collect that information and I'm going to actually call a different endpoint, which I have yet to build, which will store that information in Apple's CloudKit. I could use CloudKit here within the app itself, but that requires the user to be logged into iCloud, and I don't really want them to have to do that. So if I do it through the backend, then I can write it server to server. So I can kind of see where I'm at with this in my login view controller. Right now it was when I attempt to create my user, I was just collecting one piece of data and then not really doing anything with it, but I think it does need to be a bit of a form. And I'm going to use a table view to collect that information. So I'll go back to my main storyboard and I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to do a navigation controller here. It'll pop in its own table view controller. Table view controller. Okay, and we got prototype cells. And yesterday I was kind of mixing dynamic and static cell patterns, but today I'm just going to do dynamic cells. So it should be set up for custom reuse identifier. I'm going to just call this register cell. I'm going to go ahead and create a class. And I'm also going to go ahead and keep going with what I was doing before and actually create a cell. So this is just input text table view cell. And create that zip file. Create that. Go ahead and open that up. Looks like it's probably a good size. And I'm just going to add a text field there. Nice and centered. Gonna just go ahead and do the constraints just to be consistent. Then I'm gonna create an outlet for that field into my input text table view cell. Just gonna call it the input text field. Okay. And I'm going to get a variable here. We'll see how I use that soon. Okay. Go back to my main storyboard. Click on that cell. Go ahead and tell it I'm going to use my custom class. Guess I need to tell it my custom class for my controller is. It helps. I got that. I've got a name for my identifier. Okay, I'm just gonna get rid of that for now. Table view. I'm gonna register my cell. That static variable that I created will fit nicely in here. And I believe that's what I called my reuse identifier. Register cell. Okay. Apologize, we have not looked at this login view controller. It's coded. It's kind of generic bit of code. We can look at it in depth right now. I'm just trying to find where I actually go to create the user. And this is where I will put in a segue to that new registration controller. At least I think that's what I want to do. Whether or not I use this navigation controller or not. So let's just, for now, let's just go ahead and put a manual segue there. Just going to select the show. I'm going to go over, I'm going to select that segue. I'm going to give it register user identifier. And let's go ahead and see if we can't do this for now. Say it's myself. Let's just get rid of this old code for now. I'm going to try to segue to that new table view, which it really isn't doing anything. I'm going to leave this number of sections in this table view for now, and I'm going to go ahead and build it. I'm going to run it on an iPhone 7. All right, there's our simulator. So I'm just going to skip through this stuff. Basic form. It's not really doing any kind of audits right now. So as long as I have some data in there, I should end up hitting this attempt to create user. Set a breakpoint there. Just delete that breakpoint. I've got it to do back there. Okay. And then we popped up, and there we are at that new view controller, which has some work that needs to be done. So pop back up on the main window. We're in the user view controller, so we're just going to give it a new title called new user. Okay. And then I'm just going to open up this code page. And let's take a look at what I want to do here. So I want to create different rows to take the user input. And we looked at this yesterday. I mean, I just want to take the user's name, their business name, their email, the business ID from the form for now. So I'm going to do something in here. I'm going to actually create a private class. And I'm going to go ahead and call it my input text type. And in there, I'm going to have an index of int. That's going to be the actual location in that table view, row 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I know I wanted to do something like a placeholder that's a string. I will probably add some more fields to this little private class, but for now that's fine. And I also want a file private variable called input text types, which is going to be a array of input text type. And I'm just going to initialize this variable, and I'm going to put in create an initialization of this class where I take a index of int and a placeholder of string, and I'm going to set myself to those values. And it probably helps if I actually move that out of our way. I apologize for that. Okay, then down here I can actually initialize an input text type of, the first one's going to be first name. I'm just going to copy that for now, and we're just going to do, let's at least try out 2 of them here. Now for my number of sections, I really just have 1 section that I want to perform, and the number of rows in that section are going to be input text types dot count. So I'm going to get 2 rows for that are going to be hopefully of this input text table view cell. So Apple has conveniently given me a place to put that. So I guess for now what I want to do, I want to create another file private variable called reuse identifier, and I'm going to call it register cell. And instead of using this string here, I'm going to use it there, and then I will identify it there as well. And, you know, it better be an input text type view cell. And we will see what happens here. I think that's far enough to go for now. Let's go ahead and build this guy again. Show my simulator on the screen. Okay, we're just going to skip this to the point where I can say there's data there. Let's go ahead and create that. Already pretty much tested this breakpoint. So here we have a cell, and it is of input text table view cell type. So, and we called it twice. And here I have 2 of those cells on our screen. So the next step would be to actually configure those cells. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of our simulator. And inside the Swift, I'm going to have a function called configure. And for this, input text type of input. And you know what? I need to make this guy public. So now I see my input text type there. And then I'm going to say in my input text field in the text actually in the placeholder, I'm going to put input text type dot placeholder. Okay. Go ahead and run that again. Let's turn on the simulator. Create that. Oh, and I forgot to actually call my configuration. So let's go back into here. Just gonna call it. And we're gonna say in my input text types, whatever row I'm on, get it out of that array and send it to my cell. Let's go ahead and run that. Turn on my simulator. Okay, so now we have what we expected, something with a placeholder in those fields. Now, generally I do that type of pattern when I have like some type of model that I'm sending to my collection view. In this case, it's just a table view cell with one input text in it, but you can see how you can use that same pattern for a collection where you have some complex data model that you need to configure that collection view cell. Same principle works, but whether or not you're dealing with a table view cell or a collection view cell. But there probably are a few other things that I can do with this. I could actually, create a content type. That's optional. I'll mark it as optional. And then we'll say self.content type equals content type. I should get some errors that I need to fix. I'm going to say there really isn't anything there for these. But let's say that I want to create another input text field where I'm going to actually put email. And I apologize, I need to turn off the simulator. We're going to create the email, and then there I'm going to say, hey, the content type is email address. And we're going to see what happens there. So the only thing I did was add a new input text type to my array, and let's give it a run. Now we called it 3 times. I have a new input field. It takes an email. So not sure why the simulator is not popping up the keyboard. It's actually defaulting to my laptop keyboard. Okay, but we'll leave that for now. Don't worry about that. Go ahead and stop that simulator. And I can finish up with the rest of my fields that I want to add. So I know I wanted business name and business ID. Go back to my main storyboard, make this a little bit bigger, and of course when we're done with this, we actually want to register our user and send it back to the calling view controller. So for now, the only thing we're going to do is create that placeholder for an outlet. So when the user selects that register button, we want to call an action in our BC Tracks user view controller. We'll just put it down here before it gets too involved in other stuff that I'm going to take out anyway because I don't need. And we're going to call this register user action. Go ahead and connect that. And the only thing we really want to do here is we're going to test out to make sure that I could create another segue back. Generally, I do try to exit out that way. Depending on what we need to do in the other controller, I may add that. But there will be a web service call here to actually register the user, but I'm just testing this button for now. And I know I may be a little overdoing the debugging sessions, but we'll see. Let's turn my simulator back on. Delete that breakpoint. So I've got the fields that I want. I click register, dismiss it, and I'm back at my beginning place. Okay. So some visual things that I can address in my table view. Those annoying lines. Let's go ahead and work on cleaning that up. So I'll go to my table view, and there should be a spot in here that says I don't want any separators. And that should make those lines go away, and it'll just look like a white screen with the 5 input text fields in there. So now let's work on actually getting the data out of there. So I know I'm going to create a variable called user. It's going to be this BC tracks user type. Okay. And then user dot first name. It's going to be, so how do we get the data from our table view? So we should be able to just call the table view. And then we can call a cell for row method on there, and we just have to send it an index path. So for index path, we will just create an index path. We're gonna give it a row and a section. And the row is gonna be from our so we know the first name was the 0 row, and we know that the section, since I only have one section, that's going to be 0. So let's think about what we're doing here. I'm creating so I actually want to say let first name cell equal this as a input text table view cell. Okay. We will change this, but let's just start with the basic structure of what it's going to look like. I want the input text field, and I'm going to say give me the text. Okay, so that's generally what we want to do. Go ahead and change this now. I'm going to say user first name is the first name cell. So this seems to be, normally I would just use static cells for this, and I would just have static cells for each of them. Okay, we're going to go ahead and delete this, and I'm going to put it in my but that's not exactly what I want to do either. What I'm going to create I guess are variables for these. I'm going to call it nope, I don't think I want to do that either. Seems like a lot of code to maintain. I'm not even using this index field anyway, because when I configure it, I'm just configuring it for the placeholder. Correct in case I want to use it. So 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 for the business ID. So then I can just go through and I can say, okay, again, I don't need to use that index. I was going to put this in case I wanted to reorder them. And actually use this index to override the ordering of the array. So actually I'm just going to get the generic cell, and then if the cell is at index 0, I'm going to say that's the first name. So just get the text out of there. Okay, let's see what happens. Last name. I said email address, and this is why I didn't want to have to. So we'll fix this. After we know with what we have so far, it's working. And as you can see, I'm not even using the input text type field anymore. Not really what I had in mind. Go ahead and show that simulator again. Okay, so I'm going to have my user here. Let's go ahead and get that simulator out of the shot. And as you can see, my user object's built. I got first name, last name, business name, email, and business ID. I can print it. Doesn't really have a debug print on it, but that's that. So do I want to leave it where order matters of the array? Otherwise, I have to loop through both when I configure it. I can't just pass it this. I need to pass it the one that matches. That, which isn't that bad. Really, all I need to do is make sure that I don't think it's going to let me do that here. It's okay, it's okay. I can always make sure that I sort it. So now I know that the order matches the index. So even if I put if I cut this out and I say the business ID went here, but I want it to be 2, you can see that it's still in the right order. So I should be fairly happy with that. And then this matches the order of the index paths. I print the user and I get out of here. So now, as you can tell, we already really have the email address in this form. So I don't really need to make the user fill out the form, just to click on the create button. So we actually don't need this alert. All we need to do is call my create user. So we're just going to get rid of all this and say, you know what, it's up to attempt to create user to create that. No, actually I do. I want them to populate the email address and their password unless I put it in. Yeah, I can put the password in there. That means I actually need to add a few more fields on. So I'm just going to take off the requirement to put in the username and password, and I will add it to our controller here. No, because Firebase is going to create the username and password. Which is probably why I did that in the first place. Because as you can see here, this is where Firebase is going to create the user. The second screen is more of adding additional information. So basically I want to take this data here, and that becomes part of my registration process. Which means I also need to add to my class a variable called username, which is going to be a string, and a variable called password that is also going to be a string. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create that user, which will go to this method in my login manager that basically just uses Firebase authentication to create that user with that username and password. I have a closure on that method that will return whether or not there was an error or not. And if they don't care about the error, there will just be a status, a Boolean value there that says whether or not I was able to create the user or not. So we create that user. If it's successful, then we will fall into this code, which is where I would say, okay, if I have a good status, the user is logged in, and at that point I want to also send the data about the user to my cloud database in CloudKit. I also want to register for push notifications for that user. So basically I want to take this user and pass it to another controller to call my web service. It's really the next step in this workflow. So I think I already created a data manager. That kind of helps me with web service calls. It's a basic post. You give it a URL, you say post, you pass it some parameters for your post, and it goes. So when I registered for remote notifications, So the question is when I do that, can I just pass the additional information to that endpoint, which I haven't created. This is just putting together some wireframes for it. So I want to register for remote notifications, but I also want to register a user. So I intended to create another class similar to this, probably called register user, where I pass it a user. It's going to be a BC tracks user. Better be something in there. My post data would be user.firstname, we're just going to post and use basically the same thing for now. User.business ID, email, and business name. I'm going to post that to a different endpoint, that URL. Same. Now here, why is that telling me I can't use it here? No. Okay. Sometimes you get carried away with the publics. Oh. Okay. Now for the register for remote notifications, I didn't really care about a closure on that, but I think for register user, let's take a look at what I have so far in this flow. I've got the username and password. I'm going to perform that SIG. I'm going to go to our controller and take the inputs, and then I'm going to create the user in Firebase. And if that status is okay, I'm going to say they're logged in. Now, if I get an error from my other endpoint, I probably need to create an alert. So realistically, this stuff will actually get wrapped into another closure where I'm going to say, hey, data manager, register this user, and when you're done, if everything's okay, do that. So of course this isn't going to compile. He has no idea what I'm talking about when he says there's an extra argument in user. So let's go ahead and fill in that code to say, hey, I want a complete Of course, I need a I always forget to put those so that I don't have to call it with the actual placeholders. The underscore just means I can simply say there error, then let's go ahead and say so as you can see I didn't have to use my variable names there. And I actually want to make this an optional because he may not be there. And of course I need to add my escaping for my closure. Okay. So now if I go back to my user view controller, I'm going to call create user to create the user in Firebase. I'm going to call my register user to create him actually in my application. Upon completion of that one, if the status is okay, I'm going to say he's logged in. I want to register him for push notifications, and I'm going to dismiss this controller. Otherwise, I'm going to say, hey, there was an error, and hopefully there's some descriptive information in that localized description that will allow them to fix the problem. So one thing that I have is I'm exposing my data manager, which I don't know if I want to do that. I may create another abstraction like I have with the login manager that creates users, and then he is the one that's responsible for. So I may just have another registration manager, and within it, it's calling the actual data manager. I mean, there's not that much code other than hiding it somewhere else. Yeah, I could actually put it in my business tracks user. I could create a method called .register, and but I'll be kind of muddying up my model, which I'm trying to avoid. I'm trying to turn a new leaf and not put so much code in my data model. So I don't have the endpoint for the register user. I do have the create user that could work, but the register user is going to fail because there won't be an endpoint. So let's go ahead and test this out. Let's see what happens. Yeah, I'm a little bit worried about if I hit create user, because actually what's going to happen is I only want to register the user if my status is okay. Else I really want to, send an alert to that. You know, if the registry, if the create user doesn't work, then we're just going to back this whole thing out. Which may mean I get a little bit of a sync condition where I've created the user, but I haven't registered him yet. So I'm going to have to identify that condition at some point and say, hey, we have a user that hasn't been registered, and kind of prompt them to do the registration again. So I may have another flag that tells me whether or not I've actually done any registration at all. So I can probably go ahead and put this in my set of user defaults where I'm storing some information about what's happening on the device, like whether or not the user was logged in. And whether or not I had created a user yet. Bunch of boilerplate code to say whether or not I've created a user or not. So I'm going to go ahead and test this out. And I'm going to do a happy path. So if I create login, he's going to say invalid login. There's no user record corresponding to this identifier. The user may have been deleted. Dismiss. So I probably need to clean that up. Invalid login. I could actually create another action here where I direct them to the create user button. So I think I like that. I think I like the fact that, hey, you know, let's add another action called create user. It's going to be a default, and I am going to have a handler on it. Oops. Okay. Basically, if they click on that, I'm just going to say dot create user, where I'm going to do I have a handle on that? That should be it. So I should be able to say, hey, go get the okay, let's see what I've got up there. Oh, that's a cell ID. That's not what I want. Did I leave myself? It's got to be somewhere. No, it doesn't. Okay. So if I want to do that, what I have to actually do is I got to tap into my collection, and then I can say let login cell equal that as a login cell. I can actually say if I let it, now I've got the login cell. And then I want to say I need the email text field dot text. And then same thing over here. I need to tap into the login cell dot. And of course I have no idea what I must have called it. Why it. Oh. Wonderful. Okay. In any case, I can always hit create. And I apologize, I had that up again, but what I added was another alert action called create user. Default, I put a handler on it so that when the user clicks on that button, I'll get the login information and I'll click on create user. Okay. Okay, so I've got the dismiss, and I can actually create a user. Just make the dismiss. Create user, still works there. It actually isn't going anywhere. Why is it not going? Oh, ha 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 ha. Helps if I actually call the method there. Okay, so we're going to rebuild that. Show that shot. Okay, so I know that's working to that point. Just make sure my new alert button also works similarly. Where I try to log in. It says don't. Create the user. Okay. So there's one other thing I added to that controller. I actually added so that I could pass the username and password. So I'm going to do that back over in login view controller. So I'm going to perform that segue. And here I have a nice placeholder for when that segue is about to happen. So then I can say if I let identifier equal the seg dot identifier, if identifier is register user, then I'm going to say let my view controller equal the seg destination as ABC tracks user view controller. And then I can say my view controller now has you know. So I can do the same thing I did before. I can either save that information before I seg, or I can do the same thing I did up here, which is pull it out of the information. So I think I'll just pull it out of the existing cell. I'll just say, hey, login cell. But rather than doing this, I'm going to say vc.username equals login cell dot say vc.password equals the login cell dot password text field dot text. Then I can go back over to my view controller and I can actually populate that information. So I could say now I do need to go ahead and move this out. I do need to do that because what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, so where the email address was, I'm going to say content is going to be email, or I really need to rename it. So I'm just going to add this extra field. Okay, let's give that a whirl. There's only one thing I need to fix, and that's when I configure the data. I can then say self.input text field.text equals input text type dot content. And I never did do that for the other one. Context. Let's push that. And see what happens. So I'm going to perform that segue. And I just busted. Okay. So there's, oops, sorry about that. So there's one additional I think this is what I want to do. Oops, sorry about that. Okay, let's see if I'm able to segue now. Okay, and now I've auto-populated that one field with the information that they put in from the previous screen. So I had to do that because I'm using that navigation controller on my storyboard. So really what I'm going to segue to is the navigation controller, but inside him, he only has he's only got one root view controller. That's the new user one. I'll have to look to see if there's a better way for me to segue to that one. So I may be able to, I don't really want to pop to it, just want to see what it is. So, but I know it's the only one. I could loop through all the controllers, but at some point, you know what you've coded in the storyboard. So just switch these to a couple of lets. Should I add a cancel button here? Probably not. Do I need to edit for these fields? Probably so. But at some point, the information will be filled out. The registration button will be hit. I know I don't have that endpoint yet. Here the status is false. Okay, so I can't really do that there. The only time I want to dismiss it is if I have this status and I have that there. Okay, it's already there. Otherwise, I'm going to do that. So let's. So I was always dismissing the view controller. I had a dismiss down here, and if I'm going to do the alerts, I don't want to hit that particular piece of code. So I'm hoping that this is something to do with my crappy password. Because I should have a username and a password. Firebase is giving me a false. The password must be 6 characters long or more. So if he fails, then I probably want the handler to go back. So good functional test there. So it says that, and so it says go back here, and I can fix my password. I think this is an okay dropping off point for me. We can pick back up and put in a good password, and then I'll get into the condition where I've actually registered the user for login, but I haven't registered them in the application with the additional details. So after they log in again, then we may have to prompt them and say, hey, you don't have your registration information, and it's going to tie back in so that they can finish filling out that form. So if you have anything to add, leave me a comment. Otherwise, we will join tomorrow and complete that and hopefully get started on actually building that backend web service.